Welcome to the Volpe Report podcast, the state's premier public affairs show dedicated to the topics that matter most to Pennsylvanians. I'm your host, Chuck Volpe. Join us now as we speak to this week's guest.
The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is brought to you by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We have a special guest today, and he's actually been on this show before. This is his second show, and he was on a couple years ago. And he talked about a movement that has gained significant momentum since that time. So let's talk about it. Mark Meckler, the guest, is the president and co-founder of the Convention of States. That's a national movement seeking to call the first ever Article 5 Convention of States. Article 5, if you're wondering, is part of the United States Constitution. And if 34 states ratify the resolution language that is put before the states to call the convention, which is the stage they're currently at, there will be a convention. At that convention, specific language, according to the resolution language, will be officially adopted for the actual amendment to the Constitution. So what is this language that is being proposed for the calling of this Convention of States? And thereby would become ultimately, if ratified by 34 states, an amendment to the Constitution. What they're calling for is a balanced budget. Now, you may think that's crazy in this modern time. However, in 1998, I believe, a Democratic president, Bill Clinton, and a Republican Congress, led by Newt Gingrich, no less, balanced the budget. So that's in modern times. It can happen. If there's a constitutional requirement, it will have to happen. It's also calling for term limits for Congress, both House and Senate. And this is important. Term limits for the bureaucratic officials that are often there for decades and take on tremendous power. That's what's known as the deep state. Now, if the 34 states ratify a resolution and the convention is actually called, they will officially adopt that specific language. And that will go out a second time for ratification by the 34 states. And then if that happens, it amends the United States Constitution. This is not Mark's first political affiliation. As I've already talked about, you already heard what he did in 2009 and founded a formidable force from nothing, from dust, known as the Tea Party. As a result of Mark's leadership, the Tea Party grew to a massive national movement. And as I said earlier, electing the largest single group to Congress by a specific group, a special interest group, probably that we'd ever seen. After leaving the Tea Party, he founded the Citizens for Self-Governance. And Mark, who's a lawyer, started a class action lawsuit against the Internal Revenue Service for unlawfully targeting Tea Party groups. Mark was successful in that class action litigation, and it ended up with the verdict against the IRS. All targeted victims were made whole, a significant achievement. Under Mark's leadership in Convention of States, the article resolution we're talking about here has already been ratified by 20 states, with 2 more about to ratify, which will bring it to 22. So he's already better than 2/3 of the way there to the 34 for this convention to be called. In addition to running Convention of States, he is also still involved in a variety, as CEO in a variety of other activities, including a social media company. Mark received his Bachelor of Arts in English from San Diego State University. And he then went on to McGeorge School of Law at Pacific University, earning his Juris Doctorate. And as I said, he is a lawyer. So we hope you'll find today's show entertaining and hopefully educational, because this movement is coming to Pennsylvania.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Mark, welcome back to the Volpe Report.
It's really good to be with you again, Chuck. Thanks for having me.
Well, you've been doing the Lord's work for this country for many years, all the way back to when the bubble burst in 2007 and 2008, and the bailouts were everywhere and too big to fail, and the burden the taxpayer faced and the profligate spending by the government produced a movement that you were one of the leaders of, the Tea Party, and for fiscal restraint and to balance the budget and all that. So now we've come like that. That's 15, 16, almost 20 years ago now, that movement. And you find yourself as president and leader and co-founder of another significant movement, except unlike that movement, which was more political in terms of beliefs and ideology, this movement is one that will actually amend the Constitution of the United States. So let's start with the simple stuff, like what is a convention, an Article 5 convention of states? I'd like you to define that. I can do it, but it'd be better coming from you. You're the president of Convention of States.
Yeah, and I think it's really important because most people don't know what it is. And I don't think people should feel bad about that, Chuck. It's in the Constitution. I, as a lawyer since 1988, didn't really know anything about it until a friend of mine introduced me to it. And I hadn't heard about it in law school. We'd never discussed it or debated it. What it is in Article 5 of the Constitution are the two ways that we're allowed to amend our Constitution. And the first way, it says that whenever government decides, Congress decides they want to propose an amendment, it takes 2/3 of both houses to propose that amendment. And then that amendment goes out to the states for ratification, takes 3/4 of the states. And we've actually done that 27 times. That's every time our Constitution's been amended, that's how it's been done. But in 1787, the men in convention who were drafting the Constitution were worried about the idea that the central government might become tyrannical. And so they proposed an idea, which was the states should have the power to propose amendments as well. And they gave us that power through Article 5. It says whenever 2/3 of the states would like to gather in convention and propose amendments, they can do so. And what they do is they put out what they call resolutions. Each state puts together a resolution. And if you get 34 of them that match, saying what the states want to talk about, then you have a convention of states. And so that's the process that I've been working on now for over a decade. So far, 20 states have proposed that resolution through their state legislatures. Very simple process. The governor's signature isn't necessary. The states simply have to say in both houses, we want to gather and we want to talk about some stuff. And they have to specify what that stuff is. I think this is a really important piece that people need to get. They have to say specifically, what is it that we want to talk about? And they all have to agree in advance. And in the case of our resolution that we're pushing forward, there are 3 things. Anything that would impose term limits on the federal government. If you had a live audience right now, they would cheer to that one. So we're going to pretend we can hear them cheering out there. But this is important too, Chuck, not just on Congress, also on the deep state, on staffers and bureaucrats, because we got to rotate those folks out of there too. They have way too much power.
Agreed.
Second is anything that would impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. We all know that the federal government can't just keep spending more money than it takes in forever. Eventually, you're a smart financial guy. It's going to collapse eventually. We don't know exactly when that comes, but we know what's going to happen. They'll never stop on their own. So we need to impose a balanced budget amendment, tax caps, spending caps. Here's a common sense one. How about generally accepted accounting principles?
God forbid.
Most people don't realize that the federal government doesn't even use those. They just account sort of willy-nilly however they want. And so we got to fix that stuff. And then the last thing is anything that would take power or jurisdiction away from the federal government. To be very specific about that, it means we can tell them that certain agencies are not allowed to exist. They shouldn't be involved in education. They shouldn't be involved in healthcare. They shouldn't be involved in energy or environment. Every state has those departments on their own. There's no reason that the federal government has departments like that. And there's no constitutional authority. So this convention would have the power to get rid of agencies like that as well.
That wonderful, Hornbook law worthy presentation. By the way, to ditto you, I don't remember ever covering, and I spent a whole year on the constitutional law. I don't remember once even ever hearing Article 5. we skipped over that one.
Yeah.
But to your point, Mark, and it's well made now, and again, a tutorial-worthy explanation of what it is. You've talked about generally you have to say what the convention is for. Are you running into any issues with, for lack of a better word, one state nitpicking something it feels strongly about that the other one doesn't? And at what point, so can one resolution be a little different than another state's resolution if the rubber hits the road, said, well, that's a part we don't agree with. I can't get that through our state, but we like everything else. Does that make sense, that question?
Yeah, it does. And we have to be really cautious about that because it takes 34 states to all agree on what the convention is about. Right. One of the reasons we've never had a convention in American history, this is really interesting, Chuck. There have been over 400 applications for convention
Wow.
in the course of American history. And remember, at this point, we only need 34 states to agree. So why haven't we gotten to convention? Because the states haven't agreed on what they're going to talk about. And so, yeah, I think this is a difficult issue. What we're doing that's never been done before is we have a model resolution. People can find that on our website. Every state has to pass the same resolution. This is why once you get to 34, you know you're going to have a convention.
Of course. Let's assume that you get this convention, that you're successful, and you're giving. Let me be clear. You need 34 states. 20 are already in the bank. 2 more, I think, are just about to come on, or Kansas did come on.
Right.
Wyoming hasn't yet, but is about to. Is that correct? State of Wyoming?
Actually, Wyoming, we made it through one house this year with a super majority, but we lost by a slim margin in the House of Representatives. So we'll be back next year on Wyoming.
We're going to go back to Wyoming. I know Pennsylvania is in that target area and right now. And, you know, the good news for you here in the state of Pennsylvania, and God knows you have as a top advisor, former United States Senator Rick Santorum, which can give you the lay of the land as good or better than I can in Pennsylvania. But the good news is, despite having a pretty far left governor, Josh Shapiro, we have a solid Senate Republican, and we blew it last time. Somehow, with the red wave of 24, we managed not to flip one seat in the Pennsylvania. My father served in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, so it's near and dear to my heart. They couldn't do it, but they're setting the bar high again this year. So if they do flip that one seat at this midterm, then you'll have a Republican House and a Republican Senate. And I know a lot of my friends are already committed, guys like United States Senator Dave McCormick and most of our congressional delegation. So it would seem it would catch steam, and Pennsylvania might join that crowd if they can flip one seat in the House of Representatives. But
yeah, look, Pennsylvania is on a very personal level. It's high on my list. It's high on my list for a lot of reasons. One is, like, you guys are the state where liberty was born.
Independence Hall, Philadelphia.
To me, yeah, so I'm somewhat horrified that you guys weren't the first state to do this, right? Because there is a historical understanding in Pennsylvania that the federal government cannot be the main seat of power in the United States of America. This is all born out of Philadelphia. And so, yeah, I think we can get it done. I do believe that you guys are going to flip that house back again, and the Republicans are going to be in charge. We don't need the governor. It doesn't matter. Okay. And with the help of people like you, and of course, Senator Santorum being originally from Pennsylvania and sort of the favorite native son there, I think we can get it done.
Yeah, I have very high hopes for it. So that was, I segued away. So let me get back to what I was going to originally ask about. Now, let's say you have your convention. What does it take to amend the Constitution from that point forward if you have your convention?
Yeah, so I think this is another really important question, Chuck. You're doing a great job. Have you ever been a professor? Because I feel like you're walking us through this perfectly.
Well, Mark, I was an old trial lawyer, and I've been doing this show for 13 years. So, you know, even a dog, Pavlov's dog, heard the bell. Yeah, I picked up a few things, but thank you.
You're sequencing us perfectly here. So you get to convention, and when you get in convention, what happens is there's going to be debates in convention. It'll look a lot actually like a state legislature. They'll break into committees. They'll debate those 3 subject matter areas we talked about. And if you can get 26 states, a simple majority to agree on any proposed amendment, then that amendment goes out to the states for ratification, and it takes 3/4 of the states. And I want to make a really critical point here, because the opponents of this from the right and the left both make the same argument. And the argument is, we don't know what the convention's going to do, and it might run away, and it might do a whole bunch of crazy stuff. And well, the answer to that, really, and this is the best possible answer, is it actually doesn't matter, because whatever comes out of convention has to be approved by 3/4 of the states. And I'm going to do something here that's a little crazy, but I've been doing it for a lot of years. It works, which is my personal email address is mmeckler@cosaction.com. And so if somebody is listening to this, like, I don't know, Chuck, I don't know, Mark, I'm a little bit scared by this. I'm afraid they might pass something crazy out of that convention. I want people to remember it's only a suggestion. So if you're afraid of it, then take that email address I just gave you, mmeckler@cosaction.com. Send me the amendment you're afraid of, not legally, but just in layman's terms, and a list of the 38 states that you think will ratify it. And I know what's going to happen. I'm challenging your viewers. They're very smart people. I know already what's going to happen because I've been doing this for over a decade. I will get 0 emails. I've never gotten 1 email. because you simply can't do it. There's nothing that you or I, as conservatives, would be afraid of that could get ratified by 38 states.
Agreed. So, in other words, you're not limited by whatever the resolution says. You can expand beyond the resolution, the wording of it.
No, actually, the reality is you are very limited. There's all kinds of procedural protections.
Okay, so you are limited.
But the number one objection that I hear, Chuck, from people is, I don't believe they're going to follow those limitations. Because remember, each state says the only thing you can talk about are those three things. So when they go in, you have a supermajority of states that have agreed to only those three things.
Right.
You have a supermajority of states that will hold the convention to those three things.
Right.
But people are fearful, which I don't like, because the framers and the founders that were there in Pennsylvania, they were not men who were afraid.
Right.
They were bold and courageous men. But I hear this fear all the time. And so I like to squash that fear by saying, well, I don't believe the convention can get out of control.
Of course not.
But even if it did, it doesn't really matter because it takes 38 states to ratify.
Well, I'm going to let my own personal historical curiosity, because I'm a student of history and love political history. So would this be effectively akin to what occurred in 1787 when, of course, the Declaration of Independence was 1776. Then we had that Revolutionary War thing and all that. But if I'm correct, you could correct me on the years, but was it not 1787 when that was the year this Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia got together and actually ratified a constitution that we live under to this day? Would that be akin to what those folks, the Benjamin Franklins and the Thomas Jeffersons and the John Jays and the James Madisons, were doing back then at that Constitutional Convention?
The short answer is no, actually, which seems strange. But so let me make the legal distinction for you.
Sure.
I'm going to use a big legal word, which I hate to do. You could charge me extra after this for the big word. And that convention was what was called a plenipotentiary convention. What that means is they had all power. They had no limitations on what they were doing. So every delegate that was sent to that convention carried a commission. The vast majority of their commission said they had all power necessary to render the form of government suitable for the times. And so they were unlimited in their power. This power is what's called a limited convention because it operates under Article 5 of the United States Convention. So it is limited to the call of the convention. So it's just a different beast altogether.
Thanks for that. Well, now you've educated me already too. And I'm a follower and supporter and all that. Now, let me give a kind of a historical and get your comment on this. I've obviously, because I've been a follower of yours and a supporter for a couple of years now, and I've had discussions and debates with various people on the concept. Usually when they hear it, it's a new foreign thing for them. And like you've had to do many times. And but one of the I get scoffed at on the concept when I talk about a balanced budget, that it's not possible. And I think, and this is why I want your comment, I think it was it Nixon that took us off and finally said budget doesn't have to balance? I don't know if it was him. But I am sure of much later, 30 years later to be exact, which is still modern era, I consider, like the turn of the 21st century. Yep. A Democratic president, no less, Democratic President Bill Clinton, in lockstep with the Republican Congress, managed to pass a balanced budget, a balanced federal budget. So for all of those that think we're talking about a Quixotic type of impossible dream, that it just can't happen, no, it did just happen. It can happen. So
I completely agree with that. It's funny because you mentioned that I politically come out of the Tea Party movement. And I remember very well when the Republicans were about to take the House, John Boehner was about to go from minority leader to Speaker of the House. I had a chance to sit down with him in the minority leader's office. And I made a suggestion to him, which was just what you're talking about. I said, look, we think you should do something radical. You should propose Bill Clinton's last budget because the budget was balanced. And from a political perspective, and that's a real jujitsu move, right? I mean, all you're going to say, bottom line is we just want to do what the Democrats did last time they balanced the budget. And what happened was very telling to me, Chuck. I mean, it was really a lesson for me in politics because I was new at the time. He laughed at that. Like it was so ridiculous. It was absolutely, it could not possibly be done. Obviously, it can be done. It has been done in the modern era. The government didn't come crashing down with the balanced budget. In fact, it was much healthier. And our country economically was much healthier back then.
You know, I got a wonderful picture in my mind as you were explaining your direct interaction with Leader Boehner. But having said that, you know, just recently I've become a fan, shockingly, I'll admit to myself, beside you, with Bill Maher, because he has come a long way from being the poster child of deep blue, liberal, never progressive. He's very always with, I'm not a progressive. They're Marxists and radicals. He's clearing that, but traditional liberal values. And he is now openly, for the last couple of years, you're probably aware, Mark, espousing the fact the Democratic Party is no longer in touch with any Western civilization or liberal values that they had espoused. Your illustration with the former leader is important because it gets to something that Democrats are sometimes, amazing to me, shocked in lacking in their own history knowledge. And let me give you one other example. I brought up Bill Maher for a reason. So I'm watching a show about a week or two ago. One of the guests is one of my favorites, Schiff, the congressman from the most lying, deceitful, duplicitous, what's his first name again? It escapes me.
Adam Schiff.
Adam Schiff, right. Deceitful, duplicitous, everything else. So he's
I'm just going to say you're being way too nice to the guy.
I thought, well, look, it's a family show, Mark, so I'll keep it clear.
Fair enough.
He is reading, literally pulls out a piece of paper, Bill Maher. He reads something that, you know, about statements that were clearly attributable to Trump, that Adam Schiff is like scouring at, and at one point said, yeah, that sounds like our guy. And when he got done, he folded up, he looked at him, he said, for the last 100 words, that was a direct quote from Barack Obama. You had to see his face. Like he almost shrunk in his seat, and they actually got in a little verbal altercation over it but that's the point. When you put the mirror up to the Democrats, the radical progressives that are running their party now, many don't recognize it. They can't believe some of what they're espousing or what people like Hillary Clinton have said or has said, what people like Barack Obama have said. So when you add all that up, it's just interesting now that what you're engaged in and what you're up against the hardest enemy, I feel, is what I'll call conventional wisdom. You know, when you all get together and decide who can and cannot win a governorship or who cannot win a presidential election, everybody kind of, the powers that be, the elites, the intellectuals, they have no chance. Well, they said that about Donald Trump, too, as I recall, when he came down the escalator.
Yes.
So if you can get over that hurdle, that mental hurdle of, they'll never do that. And that's why I wanted to bring up the point, well, wait a minute, even the balanced budget just happened with a Democratic president, and it can happen. So what is your message in those regards and why it's so important for our future, Mark?
Look, I would go back, and you're a student of history, I'd go back to American history to start with and just say the American experiment can't happen, really, if you want to go back in American history. And you think about, I think we underestimate what those men and women and families did at that time in history. When they fought the British Empire, it wasn't just they fought a war against another country. That was the greatest empire ever to exist in human history. And there was no argument about that. It was, by the way, culturally the greatest, artistically the greatest. They had the greatest fighting force ever in human history, the greatest political system in human history. Their soldiers were the best trained, best fed, best paid, most disciplined in human history. And a ragtag band of merchants and lawyers and writers picked up muskets and fought that army. And in no way, shape, or form would anybody who was a betting man back then have said, yeah, those guys are going to win that revolution against the crown. And they did. So when people say, well, you can't do something, and they're referring to the United States of America, I feel like they're just ignoring American history. And I want to point out a couple other things from American history. World War II. I mean, I think, again, we take this for granted. You think about, we fought a multi-theater war against fascism, against Nazism. We defeated Nazi Germany. We defeated Japan, the Emperor of Japan, a religious-driven, essentially type of jihadi war. Yeah. And we defeated and crushed both those nations in a multi-theater war. And we're basically, compared to those countries, a young upstart country. That's impossible. And then I'll give you one more example, which is, and this goes back to the Kennedy family. He said we were going to the moon. We went to the moon. I mean, I want people to think about that. There was no chance. You didn't have cell phones. You didn't have supercomputers. The rocket that went to the moon, that actually landed on the moon, had a computer that is much less powerful than this cell phone running that rocket ship. We went to the moon. So when anybody says about anything that Americans want to do, oh, you can't do that, that's impossible, I think, well, are you not an American? I don't understand what you forget about American history.
America, if it means one thing, to your eloquent answer, it's that nothing's impossible. And if it wasn't put in the United States Constitution for a reason, I'd say we hit the reason with what's going on in this country right now. The gridlock in Congress, the profligate spending. I think now would be the time for it to catch fire. And I am very proud to lend my support. And you've done some miraculous things yourself. You turned the Tea Party from nothing into probably circa 2008, 2009, 2010 midterms, probably the most formidable force we had seen in the country up to that point. So it can be done.
Yeah, it definitely can be done. And, you know, Chuck, one of the things I get to do that's so unusual is I get to travel all over the country. You and I were talking before we went on the air. I just came from South Florida. And unfortunately, I had to drive because of all the stuff going on with the airlines.
The Democrats shut down, the funding to DHS, of course.
Yeah, but I've been to 49 of the 50 states. I hang out with people in all these states, regular people, but also just state legislators. I have a lot of faith in the state legislatures all over the country, different breed of politician in the state legislature than what you see in Congress. And so I have a lot of faith in the American people still. People watch TV and they're depressed and they're discouraged by what they see. And I understand that, but there's an underlying greatness that still exists in the United States of America. And if you doubt our ability to accomplish things, then you doubt the American people. And I think you do that at your own peril.
I agree. Mark, it's hard to believe we just blew through 30 minutes of this show. It was a labor of love for me, and I think it blew through so fast because your answers are spot on. Hopefully I asked the right questions to educate people when they see this show. And we're going to be putting that banner up continuously, and hopefully you get a pretty good bump from it. And you have my number, so call anytime. I've told your people I'll do all that I can. I'm engaged on a lot of fronts right now, flipping the House seat, as you know. So I'm fighting and helping in your battle in another way, maybe not directly.
Yep.
But please keep me in the loop on everything, and I'll help as much as I can.
Yeah, and Chuck, I would throw that back at you as well. Anything I can do to help you, and specifically, let's chat about at some point soon what you're doing to help flip the House. I'd love to hear what the plans are.
Sure.
And see if there's anything that our grassroots can legally do to help in that fight, because it's got to happen. And aside from convention of states, it's got to happen for Pennsylvania. The fact that you guys lost by one seat last time, it's just, I can't even describe how painful that was for me as an outsider.
Well, let me just a slight correction to that. We actually lost by one seat 2 years before that. All we had to do this time was flip it back to what it's been for 20 years. But here's the kicker. At a time when everyone Republican won, the president had the highest vote total ever in the state. We flipped the Democratic congressional delegation to Republican. We picked up, of course, we flipped out a Democratic U.S. Senator, Bob Casey, for Dave McCormick. But, Mark, thanks so much, and I will be in touch.
All right. Good talking to you, Chuck. Thanks a lot.
Have a good day. Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Volpe Report podcast. Be sure to visit our YouTube and Facebook pages for upcoming episodes. You can catch up on the Volpe Report podcast on your favorite podcast provider.